chapter 6. And it's also taken from the Message, so it's in plain English. A little different reading. Take your stand in court. If you have a complaint, tell the mountains. Make your case to the hills, and now, mountain, hear God's case. Listen, jury earth, for I am bringing charges against my people. I am building a case against Israel. Dear people, how have I done you wrong? Have I burdened you, worn you out? Answer. I delivered you from bad life in Egypt. I paid a good price to get you out of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, and Aaron and Miriam to boot. Remember the Balak king of Moab tried to pull, and how Balaam, son of Beor, turned the tables on him? Remember all those stories about Shittim and Gilgal? Keep all God's salvation stories fresh and present. Keep all God's salvation stories fresh and present. How can I stand before God and show proper respect to the high God? Should I bring an armload of offerings topped off with yearling calves? Would God be impressed with thousands of rams and buckets and barrels of olive oil? Would he be moved if I sacrificed my firstborn child, my precious baby, to cancel my sin? But he's already made it plain how to live and what to do. What God is looking for in men and women is quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love. Don't take yourself too seriously, and take God seriously. May the Spirit open up these words to our hearts and to our minds. Today, we're talking about Dr. King. Nearly 100 years, whoops, wrong page. We're going to look at King's legacy and courage for our world today. And I'm going to say, let's start by remembering just a little bit of history. Nearly 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, African Americans, especially in the southern states, still lived in an unequal world of segregation, various forms of oppression, including race-inspired violence. Jim Crow laws at the local and state levels barred African Americans from classrooms and bathrooms, from theaters and voting booths, from juries and legislatures. And finally, in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the separate but equal laws that had allowed racial discrimination in schools with the decision of Brown versus the Board of Education. In that turbulent year that followed that important decision, civil rights activists used nonviolent protest, non-civil disobedience to bring out change, and civil disobedience to bring about change, as seen in the movies such as Selma, which we played the theme song from today. Through their action, the federal government finally enacted legislation such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is practically gone now, and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. Many leaders from within the African American community and beyond rose to prominence during the Civil Rights era, including Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. In Kansas City, many leaders such as Reverend Nelson Fuzzy Thompson, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II, and others risked and sometimes lost their lives in the name of freedom and equity. Today, we have a national holiday celebrating King, because he gave his life for the freedom and equality of all humanity in America. So let's take a little moment and a quiz. In 1955 through 1956, Montgomery bus boycott, a protest against segregated public facilities in Alabama, was led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and lasted for how many days? Anybody know? 381. That is determination. Martin Luther King realized that the nonviolent tactics used by this Indian political and religious leader was one of the most important weapons available to African Americans in their struggle for freedom. Who was the Indian political and religious leader?
Gandhi.
Mahatma Gandhi. With the goal of redeeming the soul of America through nonviolent resistance, this organization was established in 1957 to coordinate the action of local protest groups throughout the South, drawing on the power and independence of the black churches to support its activities. Who knows what the organization was? Southern Christian Leadership Conference. During what event did Martin Luther King deliver the famous I Have a Dream speech? March on Washington, yep. And what was a common motto of the civil rights activists in the 50s and the 60s? Exactly. We have one person with a very good memory.
Southern boy.
Today, often we take our freedoms for granted. Yet in light of our recent history, we may be much more aware of underlying prejudice and fears that have been festering in the dark around us. I have more to that, but as I was reflecting this morning, I wanted to pull this out first. This is from Reverend John Paddock, who is a rector of Christian Episcopal Church in Dayton, Ohio. He has a Master of Divinity degree from the Episcopal Theological Seminary in Virginia and a Doctor of Ministry degree from United Theological Seminary in Dayton. His thesis was titled Reframing the Dialogue on Racism in America in a Parish Setting. And he starts off with this: I am white. I would never have thought to open a reflection on my life and spirit in that way until I participated along with Dr. John Dohauer in a doctoral program where we were asked to write our spiritual autobiographies through the lens of race. Like John, I went through numerous drafts of not getting it until I came to my own aha moment. I remember that exact moment. I had completed the latest draft of my spiritual autobiography, and I was driving from Dayton, Ohio to Kansas City on I-70 to attend a meeting of our peer group where I would present my paper. Somewhere in western Indiana, the thought flashed through my mind that I was white. I was driving a late model car down the interstate without a care in the world that the highway patrol would pull me over for anything but an egregious traffic violation. Quote, I am a white man, unquote. Scales fell from my eyes, and for the first time I was able to see my life and being in a whole new light. Though not an entirely new lens, if you will, I, John Paddock, have race. By that I mean something far more than being conscious of my skin color when I'm with a group of blacks. In the same way that tinted lens will color everything seen through it, seeing the world through the lens of the race changed the way I see everything. It began when I was able to see that I have race. Race belongs to me as much as it does to a black, brown, yellow, or red people. Prior to that, to speak of a race problem meant that the problem belonged to someone else, because I didn't see myself as having race. I was just the norm, which meant that I was obviously oblivious to the implications and effect of my racial identity. At that moment, he tore up his draft and had to write something else for that afternoon. And it's interesting now, that is actually a standard in seminary. To tear down, to look at where you come from, to understand, especially for most of us in seminary who were white, we were coming there from a point of privilege. We got there because we didn't have to worry about questions about our status. We didn't have to worry about questions of what neighborhood we were in. We got there because, well, quite frankly, most of us had middle-class families that were willing to pay for it, or we could get student loans just because we were white. I mean, quite frankly, I suspect if an African American went to seminary with my situation, they would never gotten in because I was given a student loan even though I was on full disability. I do not believe anybody else would have had that privilege if their skin was maybe a different color. Because I had no source of income, I had no guaranteed job, I had no reason to be there, and it was graduate school, I already had my BA. I was born and raised in Detroit, I like to say, but when I think about it, not really. I have a vague memory of being in my basement with my parents as we watched the TV during the 1967 Detroit riots, also known as the 12th Street riot. It was a violent public disorder that turned into a civil disturbance in Detroit, Michigan. It began early in the morning hours of Sunday, July 23rd, 1967. What caused it to fire up was a police raid of an unlicensed after-hours bar then known as the Blind Pig. Just north of the corner of 12th Street, today Rosa Parks Boulevard, and Claremont Avenue on the city's near west side. Police confrontations with the patrons and observers on the street evolved into one of the deadliest and most destructive riots in the U.S. history. It lasted 5 days, surpassing the violence of and destruction at Detroit's race riot in 1943. To help end the disturbance, Governor George W. Romney ordered the Michigan Army National Guard into Detroit, and President Lyndon B. Johnson sent in both the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Divisions. And for some reason, I just have pictures of people parachuting out of planes over the city of Detroit, which did not happen. The result was, and it's very sad to say, 43 dead. 1,189 people were injured. Over 7,200 arrests and more than 2,000 buildings destroyed. The scale of the riot was surpassed in the United States only by the 1863 New York City draft riots during the U.S. Civil War and the 1992 Los Angeles riots. The riot was prominently featured in the news media, live television coverage, extensive newspaper reporting, extensive stories in Time and Life magazine. The staff of Detroit Free Press won a Pulitzer Prize for general local reporting for its coverage. It seems strange to me that you would win a prize for covering something so violent. But the story had to be told, and they ventured right into the city and did it. It was immediately after this event that my parents decided to pack up and move to suburbia. They moved to Livonia, Michigan, where I lived from basically kindergarten through 5th grade. And though I can't find proof of it, I do recall that African American people were not legally allowed to live in Livonia in the earlier days, in the 50s and the 60s. It was set up as the white suburb. It was way past the wall. They actually built a wall around one section of Detroit that said, this is the city and this is suburbia. The neighborhood we lived in used to have steel gates. They were gone by the time we got there. And what's really sad, it is still the whitest city in America. I don't recall my parents being blatantly racist. And then again, they had no reason to be. They had no reason to display it. They lived in a safe, white, clean-cut neighborhood. They lived in the whitest city around. I never saw any people of color except for maybe on TV. And finally, we had left Livonia, moved to the country, and then moved back to Livonia so I could go to high school, and my brother could go to high school. We finally went to a school that was very well integrated. In high school, I actually became active in a group called Focus Hope. It was founded in 1968 by a Catholic priest named Father Bill Cunningham. And their mission was recognizing the dignity and beauty of every person. We pledge intelligent and practical action to overcome racism, poverty, and injustice, and to build a metropolitan community where all people may live in freedom, harmony, trust, and affection. Black and white, yellow, brown, and red from Detroit, and in suburbs of every economic status, national origin, and religious persuasion, we join in this covenant. To this day, they're still one of the finest examples of inner-city work, development, and justice work. And this pledge is still kind of mine today. There are many emotions surrounding this week. I believe that things that were allowed to fester in the United States, things that were allowed to live in darkness, have been brought to light over the past year. I believe there's great opportunity in that if we choose to pay attention, if we choose to do something. We can live to love those in pain. We can stand with those on the margins besides our own margins. And we can fight so that all may live equally in the love of God. The all-loving God, the all-loving, that means the language of us versus them needs to stop. And I've heard a lot of that over the past couple weeks. Those idiots that voted for that idiot. Blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? There's nothing we're going to do about that now, like grumbling. This means we can fight for what we believe in without vilifying the other. Especially another part of America that is us, really. I mean, without vilifying another part of the world that is us. For we, each and every one of us, are beautiful children of God, created in God's image. You know, sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes we don't agree, and sometimes it's hard to remember. See, I am a white man who was lucky enough to be raised in the shadow of King's work, King's words. I believe Dr. King's vision can still come to pass. Dr. King did say, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. Our First Lady even said that. We must take the higher ground. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. This is just as true today as it was then. Yes, we have fun with the late-night comedians and the, well, Randy Rainbows of the world. But we must be cautious that the fun in the comedy and our frustration does not turn into violence, hatred towards the other. Does not turn into an us versus them. Do not allow hatred, anger, and demeaning language to become our mantra. We must not allow our dialogue to degenerate into hatred and name-calling. If you are frustrated, honor Dr. King's legacy by, I suggest, writing letters, attending local government, work in the system, love your neighbor. Love your neighbor, by the way, is the one you do not understand and do not like what they are doing in government or what laws they are passing. Those are your neighbors. Those are my neighbors. Just a little something to think about in this really odd little week where we are celebrating one of freedom's and civil rights' greatest leaders and inaugurating a interesting candidate. See, you can be polite without being too polite. So I want to say happy birthday, Dr. King. May your legacy live on in me, and I hope in each and every one of us. Amen. For those who are visiting, at this part of the service, we take our prayers, what are usually our intentions and our concerns, and we actually physically bring them up. By lighting a candle, pushing it firmly into the sand so it doesn't fall over and set everything on fire. So I will light a first candle so there's a light here so you don't have to reach over the altar. And feel free to come up during the song